Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We turn now in the Johnson edition to poem 442, God Made a Little Gentian. Now this is an interesting poem because it in some ways discloses Emily's struggle. Some would call this another theodicy, a question of the pain or suffering, especially of rejection, more particularly of the late bloomer. Just to remind that a gentian is that flower of late autumn, right? It's one of the final flowers to bloom. When published the 5th of February, 1891 in The Independent, this one was called Fringed Gentian. It is another poem about poetry, and more particularly maybe about Emily as poet. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments. We talked about our big five: epistemology, what does the poem say about what we can know? Ontology, what does the poem say about who we are? Psychology, the study of the individual mind. Sociology, the study of the collective mind. And the last of our big five is the question of theodicy, pain, suffering, sorrow. Why must there be rejection, for example, of a young, brilliant poet, as we're obviously dealing with here? I'm also hopeful that you've worked through the preceding 441 poems. We just finished with 441. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. That never wrote to me part is really important in the reading of this poem. And there's a number of poems that we'll already have seen that are going to help us. For example, Gentian itself will be mentioned already in poems 18 and in 20 and in 331 and in 342. So it's a flower that Emily identifies with, and we'll for sure see this here. The Emily is late bloomer is the point of this poem, right? Emily actually identifies as well with the North in letter 368. She said it this way in 1871 in a letter to Thomas Higginson, very important person in her life. Quote, "If I exceed permission, excuse the bleak simplicity that knew no tutor but the North," end quote. And another scholar has pointed out that this is a poem that shows the connection between psychic recovery and the work of writing, and I very much like that approach to this poem. God made a little gentian, it tried to be a rose and failed, and all the summer laughed, but just before the snows there rose a purple creature that ravished all the hill, and summer hit her forehead, and mockery was still. The frosts were her condition. The Tyrrhene would not come until the North invoke it. Creator, shall I bloom? Now, it is interesting, the poem begins with God and ends with Creator. By the way, Emily references God or gods in 127 of her poems. It is, we've already seen it a number of times. Notice God made a little gentian, not the little gentian, a little gentian. This poem will identify from the very beginning Emily with this little flower. And again, as we said, she loves the word little. 172 poems shall reference the word little. Gentian is this purple flower, right? Blooms, as we said, late autumn. We've commented on the other Gentian poems already, 18, 20, 331, 342. We'll see it one more time in 1424. Notice, though, about this little flower, it tried to be a rose. And, of course, we've seen the references to roses already in a number of Emily's poetry. In other words, the little gentian tried to be what it is not and failed, and all the summer laughed. It might be here in this personification moment that Emily is suggesting of other writers, other publishers, people that she has sent her stuff to who roll their eyes or laugh. And it's true. I mean, we have, of course, a community who is reading along in the Johnson edition to try and study every one of these poems. But there's some people who try this and they cannot stick it out. They're like, man, this stuff is just, I don't know, it's just too different. And they laugh. The word but is central in so many of Emily's poems. In fact, it's a fun study to just read all 1,775 poems of the Johnson edition and just circle the word but every time. And most of the time, it's this kind of but, where she'll set up some kind of a juxtaposition between two ideas. In the first part of this poem, it is a little plant, a little flower, tried to be what it is not. A gentian tried to be a rose. But just before the snows, obviously autumn, right? There rose, notice the use of the word rose, it's brilliant. I mean, guys, Emily has to be having a great time as she's playing this game. The Gentian tried to be a rose, but right before the snow, there rose a purple creature, right? That, notice the language, ravished all the hill. Wow, it's an interesting choice, right? And summer hid her forehead. Almost as if there's some kind of sexual language here, and embarrassment of some kind or another. And mockery was still, from going from laughing to mockery. I've said this before, her use of the word still is really important. I think she loved this word because the word has double meaning. Yes, we can say, for example, I am still, meaning I'm not moving. But we can also say, I am still in room 303, some sense of duration, right? As opposed to stillness. T.S. Eliot, of course, I think learned use still from his study of Emily's poetry. What is it? He says we must be still and still moving into another intensity in four quartets. Then the last stanza. The frosts were her condition. In other words, she's tougher, right? This little Gentian flower. She's tougher. The frosts were her condition. The Tyrrhene would not come. Tyrrhene mentioned in poems 140 and in 152, you'll remember. Of course, this is a reference to ancient Tyre and the famous, purple dye, the dye that came from Tyre. Until the north invoke it. Notice capitalized north. Creator. Now all of a sudden the poem turns to God, right? Only it's directly addressing God. Creator, shall I bloom? Now this voice of Emily, where she seems to oppose deity, we saw in 248. We're going to see it again in 1651, and we'll see it as well in 569. Emily loves the question. In many ways, this is why we call Emily the teacher a Socratic teacher, or she obviously follows the approach that Christ took. Notice how many times Christ loves to ask questions. When I return, shall I find faith on the earth, as an exemplar. What exactly is happening at 2a here? I think the point that Emily's making is it's hard to be a late bloomer, to believe in yourself and not give up, right? To live with the mockery and the laughter by those who are already blooming, the roses, if you will. At 2b, well, obviously the rhetorical questions are powerful here, no doubt. There is as well, I love her use of the word rose in this poem. I mean, it's just brilliant. In 3a, there are some scholars who think that Tennyson's poem, The Princess, a favorite of Emily's, might be standing behind some of this, especially the lines that come from that poem, quote, bright and fierce and fickle is the south, and dark and true and tender is the north. Of course, tender is the word that gets used in the previous poem of 441, Letter to the World. Judge tenderly of me. Of course, we've mentioned the Gentian poems as well. Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this, to make it your own, to relate to it in some way. What was a time when you struggled as a late bloomer? And to what degree is Emily teaching you? Don't give up. Thank you.